Okay, here
That's
we
what
go.
we're waiting.
Perfect.
Oh, we don't have to sign this. Okay, very good.
Yeah,
There.
you're on.
Uh, Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our quick talk about the Azores, or Açores, as they say in Portugal. These We took this trip last year in the early part of the year, so we were home by sort of mid-March. Um, April. Oh, I've got the dates completely wrong then. No, these dates are right. Okay. Now, why is it not advancing for me? Oh, there we go. Just the delay. Uh, the Azores are sort of bang in the middle of the Atlantic. They're actually a fairly close neighbor of Newfoundland, but to get there, you have to head in completely the other direction. Uh, we had to go to Toronto and then come all the way back, then head over to Lisbon, then go, whoops, then go. There we go. Sort of back into the Atlantic, and finally got to the Azores about almost 10,000 kilometers later, whereas really, as the crow flies, it's not even 3,000 kilometers from Newfoundland, from the east coast of Newfoundland. It's amazing to think of it as a neighbor because it is subtropical. It's a most peculiar series of islands to find in the middle of the Atlantic. It's part of the country of Portugal. It's considered essentially like a province would be here. And the archipelago consists of 9 islands. We got to visit 4 of those islands, Faial and Pico and São Jorge, which are um, so close that you can get to from one to the other by ferry very easily. And then we took a plane to San Miguel, which is the largest of the islands, and that's where we ended our trip. Um, the Azores and the other islands off the coast of Africa, the Madeira, Canaries, and Cape Verde Islands, are all called Macaronesia. This is a term that was used by the Greeks to refer to anything past the Straits of Gibraltar, really. And more recently, it was applied to these islands, including the Azores. And it's Macaronesia, meaning the happy islands, nothing to do with Micronesia or terms like that. It's a bit confusing because it sounds similar, but it does refer to these really quite um, tropical islands, beautifully green islands off the coast of Africa. If you compare it to Newfoundland, if you sank the islands into the surface of Newfoundland, they'd spread off both sides. They are quite far apart. That's why you do have to use a plane to get from one to the other many times. But they have a very small land mass. They are not quite as large as the Avalon Peninsula if you put them all together. In fact, they're not far off from the size of Gros Morne, just a little bit larger than Gros Morne National Park itself. They're at the junction of 3 different tectonic plates, Eurasian, American, and African plates, and those are all actively moving um, uh, plates where there's a lot of earthquake activity and a lot of volcanism pretty well all the time. And the Azores are right plop in the middle of that, and that's why they're there for one thing, because they really are the tops of volcanoes, and that's what makes them very interesting to live on, because earthquakes and volcanic activity and everything associated with that they're very common. The first island we visited was the island of Faial. That's the airport that we came into, and we rented a car there and traveled around the island. Uh, it's very easy to drive on the islands. The roads are great. They're twisty and winding, but they'll get you pretty well anywhere you want to go. One of the places that we visited first was Capelinos, the lighthouse. There was a volcanic eruption at this point of the island in 57 and 58. And the village that was there and the fields that were there were pretty well devastated. You can climb to the top of the lighthouse. It's in being if it was damaged, it's been repaired, or it's a new lighthouse. I'm not quite sure, but um, chances are it's new because pretty well everything else was destroyed in that area. Uh, and you can look down on some of the most devastated part of the landscape. If you look to the left, you'll see that there's a thick layer of fresh gray ash over everything. And that's from that volcanic eruption in the 50s. The circular gizmo in the middle is the top of a sunken visitor center. And the neat thing about that is it doesn't interfere with the view of the lava field, but it also reflects how the villages that were there, the houses that were there, were completely sunken in the accumulating volcanic ash. There are lava bombs all over the surface. It's a fascinating place to walk around, and it's still just starting to revegetate with some native species, such as the grasses, and some non-native species, such as the ice plant that's in the green ice plant in the middle of the screen.
Already started.
Everywhere on the islands, you see basalt, either in the form of basalt flows or of big walls of ash and volcanic debris that have consolidated. Uh, Basalt is the main and really only rock type on the island, but there are many different forms of basalt, including the vesicular basalt that you see on the right-hand side, which is full of gas bubbles that as the molten magma containing gas came closer to the surface, the gas expanded, and then as the rock hardened, it left these little vesicles, these little bubbles in the rock. On the surface, you see all sorts of flow structures where the um, lava hardened very quickly on exposure to the air. And you can wander around this. And this is decades old, but it's still just starting to revegetate. And you'll also see structures such as uh, lava caves. What's the other name? That was what I'm looking for. Tubes? Yeah, lava tubes, sorry. Caves where, as the lava flowed downhill from a volcano, they cooled on the outside, forming a tube, but the liquid inside the lava inside remained liquid and continued to flow until it actually evacuated the tube and came out further downhill. Those tubes are in some cases huge, and in other cases, they've broken down and the roofs have collapsed, and you find vegetation and stuff growing in the hollows. It's a bit of a hazard for people and animals wandering around in some places. Here's a collapsed lava tube right behind Anne in this photograph. And this is just the lava surface where it's cooled, and you've got small basalt columns that are cracked apart as the lava has shrunk, and little collapsed tubes everywhere. It's absolutely fascinating. The first recent settlement of the island was in 1427 and increased after that. But a recent study showed that humans may have been on the islands back in the 700s, which is pretty astonishing. There's no archaeological evidence yet. What they've been looking at is actually um, chemical residues in the soil that allow them to know that humans and probably domestic animals, large mammals, were also on the island at some point that far back. You don't see a whole lot of native vegetation in this photograph. In fact, pretty well everything there is non-native, and that's one of the interesting things about these islands. They're well out in the Atlantic Ocean. They were isolated for a very long time, and they developed all sorts of their own endemic species, but most of that vegetation has gone. This is an aerial view, a satellite view of one of the islands, San Miguel, and if you look at those dark lines that look like rivers flowing from the center of the screen down towards the ocean. Those are gullies. Those are gullies, erosion gullies on the side of the volcano. The crater is in the middle of the screen with a lake in the middle of it. But those dark gullies have probably all of the remaining forest, the Laurisilva, the laurel forest, and the related species that used to cover pretty well all of the islands. Here again, this is getting a bit closer. The crater on the left, the dark gullies with the native vegetation, everything in between those dark gullies is either farmland or pasture land, or to the south, the lower right, that's one of the towns. So you see there's not much natural vegetation left. And this is typical of all of the islands pretty well. If you look at it more closely, you'll see there are lots of fields, there are hedgerows, hedges along the sides of roads and around houses and so on. But again, almost all of that vegetation is non-native. The towns are small, they're well kept. It's very pretty islands and very comfortable to visit and walk around. This is the largest town on the island of Faial, 12,000 people, not huge, obviously, and it's sort of the center for shopping and culture and everything on the island. You see the same sort of thing you see in most other parts of Portugal. Again, these uh, beautiful, well-kept houses, and this calçada portuguesa, the uh, stone walkways and roadways that are made with different colored stone, just set in a sand matrix. And very often you'll see people repairing these or pulling them up to put in pipes and so on. It's absolutely typical. And in fact, I'll go back to this for a moment. As you're wandering around town, you can tell pretty well what street you're on just by looking down at the pattern, because the pattern is different from street to street to street. I guess the light stone makes it easy to walk around at night, even if it's not lit, because you get reflections from moon and surrounding lights. And the patterns give you a really good idea of where you are. Another weird thing that you see is this symbol, this peculiar hooded creature. Here we have it in the calçada, in the pavement on the left-hand side, and then an historic photograph of someone wearing this traditional hood and cloak. You find it in all sorts of different forms, in ivory and in pottery, and you can see where it came from. It's this old cloak and cape that women used to wear on the islands, slightly different from island to island, but it was a traditional clothing at one point. And then you see the local take on the same thing. Here's a bit of graffiti of a hoodie and another one. Kind of cute. It's a continuing tradition, apparently. A lot of um, the island, there are lots of towns around the island, small towns and villages, and pretty well everyone you go through, you have lots of really well kept houses, beautifully painted, beautifully maintained, and then you see something like this. And in a lot of cases, these are there are two reasons for this. The houses that were either damaged during an earthquake and just abandoned and have been left to sort of fall apart, or the houses of people who've left the islands and gone somewhere else, and nobody has claimed the house. Lots of interesting photographic possibilities. Kind of sad in some cases because some communities have quite a few of them, but they are um, they're not the rule. They are definitely the exception to the way that people look after their properties. There's a very large harbor um, in Horta, and it's this time of, well, any time of the year pretty well. There are lots of sailboats in the harbor. It's because the Azores are in the center of the Atlantic. They're on a main route between North America and South America and Europe and Africa. So anyone who's sailing one way or the other is likely to pop in there either to provision or to rest or whatever. And in this harbor, they've got all sorts of concrete walls and abutments of various sorts, and pretty well every boat that comes in will go and paint something, a logo or a name or something on these abutments, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them. They go for they wrap right around the island, the harbor, so the island. There's also a former ship's chandlery that has been turned into a sort of a cafe for yachters to meet. It's the place that everybody goes to when they come to the island. And again, they leave the souvenirs on the walls, on the roof, on the floor, everywhere. And upstairs, there's actually a museum to the whaling history on the island. Sperm whaling was very important source of money for the island right up until the mid 70s, or early 70s, mid 70s, when it was finally ended. And there are all sorts of whaling factories and signs of that, museums to whaling, and places like this museum that have scrimshaw and carvings in whalebone, in whale ivory, whale jawbones, all sorts of stuff that are reminders of that whaling history. And in this case, this is a sperm whale tooth that has scrimshaw that remembers that eruption that devastated the end of Fayal Island that I showed you at the very beginning. These are people leaving their homes with the ash from the volcano rising behind them. There's some lovely trails and hikes around the town. You can get up onto the hills, and then you start to get into some of the native species, like this tree heather. It gets up to about 4 meters tall, and right at the close, it's very low and wind beaten, almost like a tuckamore, and taller as you go inland. It's got very small flowers. It's almost like some of our crowberry and some of our spring flowers are minute, but very, very numerous. And this one, as we were poking around, I found one that had some interesting insects on it. This is a scale, parasitic insect that gets onto the stem and covers itself with a waxy lump. So it looks like a bunch of little potatoes, or they look like a bunch of potatoes. This is an endemic plant, a Myrica faya, that is a fire tree, endemic to the island, related to our sweet gale and it's the other one, the waxy
Bayberry.
Pennsylvania, bayberry, yes. Um, as you drive around, you see a lot of gullies because the islands are very steep. Coming down from the volcanoes to the shore, the water carves these fairly steep gullies, and those are the ones that have all the vegetation in them. And what was I going to say about gullies? I have no idea. It's fine. Anyway, this is one of those steep gullies that drains from the highlands, and this is, as I said earlier, one of the places where the rare plants are still found down in this unfarmable landscape. There are also large um, uh, lava flats, large lava flows that extend out into the ocean, or outwash flows of material that's slumped down from the cliffs. And that's where most of the settlement and the farming occurs. A native chain fern, one of the larger ferns on the islands. And they have one little lizard that we were able to find, and it's actually introduced as well from Madeira. So from one of the other islands, it's endemic to Madeira, but then introduced to the Azores. This one has a little mite in one of its ears. We don't know where the mite came from. I had to leave that. As in many other parts of Europe, cliff fishing is a very popular pastime. You see people angling from perches way up in the cliffs, fishing very small fish out of the surf, but seemingly quite happy to get them. The base of the cliffs are covered with rock crabs. They scuttle up in all directions when you're walking, and they're rather peculiar looking things. These are both females. The males are quite bright red. The females are sort of golden speckles like this. Another thing you see a lot of on the cliffs are rock doves. They're introduced to the islands, but they're living in the Azores more or less as they probably lived before they took to human cities, and they seem quite at home, nesting in the cracks in the rocks and feeding along the shorelines. Other weird things that you see as you're driving around are gardens full of cymbidiums, orchids, Asian orchids. The reason for that is that the summer temperatures can reach up to 25 degrees, maybe slightly higher. That's about it. It's not, they do not get extreme summers, and they certainly don't get much in the way of dry periods. It's moist much of the time because of the water, the moist air coming off the Atlantic. And in the winter, it never gets much below 15. So they don't get freezing conditions. So almost anything that you can grow in a subtropical region is going to be quite happy growing here right through the year. Lots of the um, plants that have been introduced have done very well because of those temperature conditions. So Australian cheesewood, which was brought in as lumber, a tree for lumber, is now everywhere. All these yellowish green trees here, that's Australian cheesewood. The other trees in between may or may not be local species. It's hard to tell from a distance, but all the yellow green is that one species, and it forms massive areas of forest on the island. Japanese cedar was also brought in as a weather-resistant, fast-growing conifer, and they get very large. They have been planted on all of the islands pretty well, and they get harvested almost like conifers get harvested here by clear cutting. Very small clear cuts, but clear cuts nonetheless. This is the Japanese cedar still. Oh, this is and even introduced ferns and things are growing pretty well wherever they want on the island, just because the conditions are so good. Calla lily is a major weed. It's everywhere, all through pastures and ditches and pretty well everywhere you look. And in flowering season, you can't miss them. And lantana, as in southern U.S., has become a bit of a problem. It grows very lushly. Um, Pink and yellow wood sorrel, or what's the other name for this one? Goat's foot sorrel, or Bermuda uh, buttercup. They color the fields in some places. And along the roadsides, with the help of local politicians, it was decided that they should beautify the roadsides by planting um, things such as blue hydrangeas, in this case, azaleas. And so the roadsides through well, almost all of the main roads on the islands have these plantings, tight hedge-like plantings that had to be maintained very carefully by the road crews so they don't grow out into the road. So azaleas here that go on for kilometers and kilometers, and elsewhere, blue hydrangeas. And in the case of the hydrangeas, they have moved from the roadsides into the forest, up onto the hills. You can see how big the hydrangeas get. These are just normal blue hydrangeas growing behind Anne. And this is whoops, this is a photograph of what it looks like in the summer from a tourism site, an Azores tourism site. So you can see why they planted them. It's quite beautiful. But whoops, there's the photograph I'm looking for. But this is what it looks like when they're out of season, and these sh really coarse shrubs sort of grow out into the road. And road crews never have to plow the roads there for snow, but they do have to go and clip back these flaming hydrangeas. Every year they have to keep those things from getting onto the road. Another major pest plant is the Kahili ginger. Again, it gets very big. It covers vast areas. The whole hillside is one ginger patch, and it's absolutely beautiful in flower. Here it's creeping into the forest. On the right are the seed capsules, and it forms these huge roots like massive ginger that are absolutely impenetrable by other plants. Nothing else is going to get a foothold there. Uh, Anyone doing any road work has to heave these things out of the way before they can actually get down to the soil. Bird of paradise is planted and coming up wild in some places on the island, as is the giant bird of paradise. It grows almost like a palm tree, up to about 10 meters high. And lots of small things that we know from as European plants, like the narcissus and the little wild allium. Um, Frogs have been introduced. This is a Spanish or Iberian Peninsula frog that has shown up on the island. You can hear them croaking away in the evenings. So the islands have been altered quite significantly from what they actually look like, but they still are really fascinating places to visit. Here we're looking from Fayal across to the neighboring island of Pico. That mountain it is a volcano, and it's the highest point in Portugal. We'll talk a bit more about that when we get over there. This is another lighthouse that was destroyed, in this case by earthquakes in first 73, caused the first cracks, and then it was completely destroyed in 98. It's a fascinating place. It's amazing it's actually still standing. There used to be lightkeepers' houses and everything here, but the whole structure is just crumbling apart. We went up onto the major volcano on the island of Fayal. And to get to the trail, you actually have to hike through the rim, a little cave they've dug into the rim of the volcano, and you pop out the other side in the caldera of the volcano. And you can look down into the center of it. The It's 2 kilometers across, about 8 kilometers around on the trail, and it's a really fascinating walk. Because you're up high, the clouds come in, clouds move away. So one moment you can see everything, next moment you can't see your feet. It's moist. You have things like fog bows where the sun is, because of the very tiny particles in the fog, you can't quite see colors, but you can see the light being refracted. And because it's high up and the dread blue hydrangea and things like that haven't completely overrun it yet, there are a lot of the wild native species growing there. This is a plant in the daisy family, almost like our fall dandelion. We didn't see it in flower. That's when photograph I had to borrow, but you could certainly see lots of leaves. This little whitewood tree growing flat to the ground, almost like Tuckamore does on the mountains around here. And we are taking the trail. Azorian juniper, a very pretty little bush, small trees, large bush, uh, colorful um, cones that they're not bluish like ours. They're red when they're ripe. Oh, and here's another couple of shots of the caldera as things brightened up a bit. There's actually a wetland down in there, and it's a nesting area for a really important nesting area for some of the rarest birds on the islands. Continue our trip. Azores holly, you see lots of that along the roadsides, but here on the mountaintop, it's very much dwarfed, about 8 inches high. And the Azores blueberry, I don't know if they harvest the berries. I don't think they're common enough they could do that, but the flowers certainly make it look very beautiful. There's a view down from the top of the mountain down into some of the fields below, and you can see the hydrangea, the light brown hydrangea hedges that separate the fields. We are going around the rim of the volcano again. Uh, the arrow in the upper right-hand side is pointing to two people. So you get a much better idea of the size of this volcano. Here are the people again. And we get a closer view. So it doesn't look big, but it is absolutely massive. There's the neighboring islands volcano again, Pico. The vegetation here is very tussocky. It's mostly grasses and sedges in the moisture areas. And then where it's a little bit dry, you start to get into the various shrubs. And it's been pretty well trampled over the years by herbivores, mostly goats. So you see lots of little trails, usually running uh, parallel to the slope, or perpendicular to the slope of the hill. There's a great little botanical garden and a museum on the island, and they have lots of information about the various plants and the evolution of the vegetation on the island. Again, here's where they stress the proximity to places like Newfoundland and Spain and Africa. And they also talk about double insularity, the idea that a lot of the organisms that are on the island well, before people arrived, had to get there probably by leapfrogging from one island to another. So they were probably isolated. They would come from Europe or Africa to one of these islands, stay there for a while, evolve slightly differently, and then pop across to the Azores and continue. So that's one of the reasons there are these endemic forms on all of these islands. There are orchids. We didn't get to see any, unfortunately, but they do have a small selection of orchids. And they have this massive headache with introduced species that are running amok. And they talk about that a lot. Here's a great graphic that they have. The black part is the introduced species. The green part shows the native species. And the bold text in the native species are the endemics, the number of endemics, the plants that are only found in the Azores that do not grow anywhere else in the world, such as this stinkwood, a member of the laurel family, and little chickweed. Chickweeds are great at diversifying wherever they are. And little daisy, we again didn't get to see flowers on most of these, unfortunately. A really amazing plant in the aster family that they call them mallow just because of the shape of the leaves, but it is not a mallow. And the scabious, an endemic scabious with quite large flowers. And a dock that gets about waist high. This is a fascinating thing. It's got these really quite large decorative leaves and these peculiar thick fleshy stems. And it grows in the wettest areas down in those gullies. Spiny climbing smilax or greenbrier or catbrier, the Azorean ivy, which grows huge. It'll cover trees and walls, and you see it everywhere. This one, the chervil, just a very small chervil that's a bit hairy and grows wild. Various grasses and sedges, of course, that are also endemic to the islands, a bit harder to tell apart. And several ferns that are not found anywhere else. And a Selaginella. We'll see a few more as we go on. From Fayal, we went across to Pico, the place with the big volcano in the middle. Very quiet ferry trip. I think there were, what, four people on the ferry. It was not full visitor season, obviously. Pico is a pretty big volcano, and the island of Pico has about 200 smaller volcanoes that make up the land surface. It's all this just a series of lava flows coming from large and small volcanic vents. Oh, and the other interesting thing is the 100 and whoops, wrong button there. 129 identified volcanic caves of lava tubes, as we talked about earlier, and we'll go down into some of those in a moment. Again, lovely towns, very pretty little towns and buildings. You do see things like oranges quite frequently, but the a very large business trading oranges to mainland Portugal died out in the 1800s because of a blight, and they've never really recovered. People do still keep a few, but the orange industry is gone forever there. Bananas are grown in many places, and you see lots of plants like camellia and magnolia that were in full bloom while we were there. And that was in February, March, so quite early. Again, a view up onto the hillside with the volcano up in the background. A lot of the higher land, the lower land tends to be farmed, the higher land tends to be pasture. And so you run into cows everywhere. The main building material is bits of rock, bits of basalt, of course, and people make kilometers and kilometers of rock walls that line the roads and line properties. It's free and it's everywhere. And as you get higher and higher, the landscape becomes bleaker and bleaker, and the pasture land becomes poorer and poorer until you start to see cattle in these stunted cheesewood forests. And they they chewed a browse line into the trees as high as they can reach. They've eaten all the lower leaves. And the farmers will go and cut more leaves from other trees and then pile them up as branches. On the right-hand side, you can see all these dead branches. Those are fodder of cheesewood leaves that are being dropped there by the farmer. And if you are looking along the roadsides, you also see the little bits to the left of the original laurel forest. This is one of the native laurels, or this is the most important native laurel, that used to grow into quite sizable trees. Very beautiful leaves and beautiful flowers and fragrant leaves, a lovely tree, but slow growing. And because it's slow growing, they weren't tall and they weren't very good wood. They weren't valued as a lumber tree, and that's why the other species were brought in, had displaced them, like the cheesewood, like the Japanese cedar. So the laurels are now and other native tree species are reduced to very, very small areas of the islands. This is the native cherry and a little buckthorn, not very exciting looking. A very beautiful endemic viburnum. You see these a lot. These ones have flourished where the main trees have not. I think because they are used as an ornamental. That's the main reason they've done well. And now we'll go back down to the coast again and look at some more of these lava flats with their sparse vegetation. Some of the plants that grow there are also introduced. Japanese holly fern is everywhere along the coast. It does very well in saltwater sites and is quite prolific. You also see these peculiar lichens, Roxella tinctoria. This was the basis of a very important industry in the 1500s, where a dye called Oursine, reddish purple dye, or reddish, well, magenta really, dye, was extracted from these things. And people would climb cliffs and risk their lives on slippery ocean rocks to harvest as much of the stuff as they could, almost wiping the lichen out until other dyes replaced it. And now the lichens made a pretty good comeback. And you see it a lot on the coastal cliffs. You also find some of the small coastal endemics, such as this one-flowered bladder campion. Not quite as big as the photograph makes it look, but it's still a beautiful little flower. And the one flower of the forget-me-not that we actually found, this seaside forget-me-not, it was almost exterminated by land development and so on, and is now being raised and replanted in a whole series of sites around the island. We were only able to come across one little flower, and that's it right there. It's the best that we could possibly do. Back to the building materials, basalt building stone, in some cases very elegantly used to make stone walls for buildings. In other places, it's used purely as a windbreak. And here we see something called lajidos, or little walled vineyards that cover quite large areas of these coastal lava fields. It's essentially bedrock that's cracked up at the surface, almost like our limestone barrens. People have taken the loose rock and made rock walls, and then they've stuck vines, cuttings of grapevines into the cracks in the rock, maybe put a little bit of soil in with them, and that's where the grapes grow. They actually grow very well there. They've got lots of water, they get lots of sun, they're protected from wind, and they have lots of nutrient from the basalt, and they make very nice wines from them. But it's the most peculiar looking vineyard that you could imagine. That's good. We're going to go down into the lava now, into one of the lava tubes, and you get a chance to see what the surface looks like. Because the lava tubes were formed by hot flowing magma, that slowly evacuated the cave, leaving behind dripping, cooling icicles, glass icicles. Really, these are icicles made of obsidian, so that they are as hard as glass, dripping from the roof. In places, these things are squeezed down quite small. In other places, you get quite large open areas. You can see the track left by the slowly oozing, cooling lava on the bottom. Go into another one a bit later. This is what it's like coming back out into the open. Very beautiful experience. And in these lava tubes, you get the endemic bat, the one endemic mammal on the islands. And driving around, you see more of these little lava caves. There's one in a field where the roof is collapsed. There's another one up on a hillside with a pretty good sized hole coming into it. And we're going to drive the one straight stretch of road on the island, Pico. It runs right down the spine of the island and is, I think, the one place where I could have gone into fourth gear the entire time. It's strange because the roads are so twisting and winding and narrow, you generally don't get out of third gear. And all the cars are pretty well standard. I don't know if there are any automatic vehicles there. Into pasture land again, pretty wet and pretty poor pasture. Oops, no, I'm going back down to the coast again. Um, Whaling history, as I said, was very important to the islands. There are some great movies about whaling, and this is one of the typical whaling boats that was used. Here's a model. Sorry?
They were around until 87.
To 87. I thought it was 70. Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, 70 was Newfoundland.
Ah, yes. This is a whale boat made out of whale bone, or whale jawbone anyway, which is kind of strange. Also tools, whalers' tools, or carpenter's tools, really, made out of sperm whale jawbone, which is very hard and very dense. All sorts of these examples in the museum. And carved whales tooth, sperm whale's tooth, the monument to whalers, a whaling factory that I'm not sure what they're using it for now. I think that was also a museum, but we didn't get into it. And sperm whale, almost life size, on the made out on the pavement in stone. They also use a lot of tile because it's Portugal, and as well as these tiles are so an important part of the culture. A lot of the road signs and the wayfinding signs and things are also made out of tile. On the coast, you find some interesting rush meadows, plants like wild chard growing there, pennywort popping out of the cracks in a rock wall. This is an introduced species. Both the pink and white crinums are used in gardens there. And in some places, almost like the American South, you get invasive vines that are sort of swallowing forest. I'm not sure if we figured out which one this was. There were no flowers and we didn't get close enough to see the leaves. The coast, because it's in the middle of the Atlantic and there's huge distances for the wind to blow over the water, you end up with very high energy coastlines, either bare rock cliffs or in cases like this, huge basalt boulders that are piled up very high by the water. It's a very energetic, vigorous coastline, quite a dangerous one for anyone who's boating. Just taking a walk on the coast, and then we're going to take the ferry from Pico to São Jorge. And this is another very important island for cattle raising and for dairy industry in particular. And again, as you're driving down the road, you run into cattle or other animals like this. This is a photograph taken with the telephoto lens. They were up in, could see them on a cliff from the side of the road. You can see how close to the edge of the cliff they are. They're just sort of sitting right on the edge of about a 400-foot drop. It's pretty spectacular. Very, again, neat, pretty little island. The coastal trees blown, wind blown into almost tucumore-like shape because of the fetch of the wind across the water. And it's Pico, the mountain again, off in the distance. And here we ran into some peculiar things. Here you see tubs full of fire lining the roadside, which is a bit ominous. And in the background, people in weird costumes. Unfortunately, it was night, so I didn't get a great shot. Here's another terrible shot showing what looked like hunchbacks in cloaks. And here's one that Anne got that was during the day, which is much better. And the reason they all look like hunchbacks is that they're wearing backpacks under their cloaks, and they're pilgrims who are walking a route from village to village to village as part of a religious celebration at that time of year. Problem is, they'll be in the middle of a country road. You come around the corner of the road, and the entire road is packed with people like this. No warning, no indication that they're there. Terrifying as a driver. And it happened again and again. And in the airport, there was this rather dangerous and scary looking person to try to explain the whole mannequin, to explain the whole pilgrimage idea to visitors. Another endemic plant. This is a really quite beautiful bellflower. Again, we didn't see it in flower, but I have a photograph from the internet to show what they look like. And these things can be almost a meter tall. They're spectacular. Even the leaves are really very, very beautiful. This is a Splenium trichomanes, a species that we get here, a different subspecies though. And this is a second Splenium. This one is actually endemic to the Azores. It's a very leathery leafed little Splenium, quite different. Two different spurges that grow on the islands, are native to the islands. A sea fennel. There are sea fennels grow through the Mediterranean with a very fragrant leaf, and this one is pretty well every coast we went to. We saw this one in the Azores, and a little bit of hart's tongue for a native but not endemic. Just that bit in the middle of the screen. Another view of some of the farmland with mixed forest of native and non-native species. On the coast, they have these really interesting municipal swimming pools. Each town pretty well has one, and they're built by walling off a bit of a rock pool or adding a few rocks or cement to, excuse me, the mouth of a cove to close it off and to produce a safe place for people to swim. Because the waves offshore are so vigorous and dangerous, and also the water is so cold, the only way you're going to get people safely swimming is in these protected pools. And some of them are very beautiful, and some of them are huge, where they have a hectare almost of water carefully protected for people to swim in. We stayed at a bed and breakfast run by this fellow and his wife, and he is a very avid gardener who's growing pretty well anything you can imagine. He had massive avocados and sourshops and custard apples and macadamia nuts and coffee, papayas, bananas, monstera, pineapples, strawberry, arbutus, strawberry tree, rose apples. I have a list at the end of some of the things he was growing. Wonderful loquats, excellent loquats. And because he was staying there, he said, just go out and pick whatever you want. He had vegetables growing in the garden, and we'd bring stuff in and cook it up. And it was a wonderful, wonderful place to stay. And he was a very interesting host because he told us about what he was growing, where he was getting it. And the day that we left, he came back with an entire carload of more stuff to add to his very extensive orchards. Here's the best list that I could put together from just what we saw. I'm sure he had twice that many different things that he was growing. We did a bit of hiking along the coast on the island to places called fajas, no, fajas, sorry, fajas. And that's the fan-like structure in the background. And these are either outwash of rock from the hillsides or the lava flats that are flat enough that you could actually grow something there. So people have houses down there and they have small farms or other businesses, you'll see as we go along. So the only way to get to this one, you couldn't go by vehicle. This is an ATV track, and it was a very nice walk along the coast. And you certainly would not want to take a vehicle there. It was pretty sketchy in places. This is the first of the two communities, and it's been bought up and turned into a sort of a spa, but we wanted to go to the farthest of the two communities, which is in the background there. And it's interesting because the center of the outwash plain has a lagoon, and they've got a man-made opening to the ocean, so the ocean water comes in and out on a tidal basis, and the pool is now filled with clams. And this is the only place on the islands that actually has a clam fishery. And it's a very closely guarded clam fishery. The small clams, much smaller than the clams that we would harvest here, but they're very much valued by restaurants. And there's the whole area, because of this peculiar history of settlement and the rare species that are there, the whole area is protected in different ways. Some notes about how the clams are protected, and you off the street cannot just go down there and pick some clams. You actually had to be a licensed fisherman. Here are the fishermen's huts. There's one of the fishermen's boats, and that is the entire lagoon in which they're collecting these clams. The clam is a symbol for a lot of the local bed and breakfasts and so on. So it really is an important part of the culture there. Ran into a lot of little birds, the very typical birds of the area, yellow wagtail, and the Azores blackbird, which is essentially the European equivalent of our North American, let's call that Canadian robin. It sounds the same. It almost looks the same if you disregard the color, and very similar song, nesting and so on. This is the wall of the hill behind the ocean's to our back. The hill is behind the town. It's on the flat, and then the rest of the island is way up there, way high on the hill. So this is not an easy place to get to. More little coastal villages. Another beautiful coastal pool, and this is what it looks like when it's calm, and this is what it looks like when it's got a wave coming through. So you can see it would be very exciting for anyone who is doing any swimming there in between the waves. From here we went to the airport and then flew to São Miguel, the largest of the islands that we're going to visit. And São Miguel is sort of the capital for the Azores. Name of town, right? And again, it has this beautiful decorated streets, some very interesting historic buildings, and gets a lot of ocean visitors, both in the form of yachtsmen and whatever that was. And it's telling me something.
That's the name of the capital.
Okay, sorry, yeah, Punta Delgada. Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
What do you call those things?
That's cruise ship.
Cruise ship. That's what I'm looking for. Yes, cruise ship. Yes. Mine's gone dead. While we were there, we visited a hot spring. Actually, a couple of hot springs, just for fun, because they're everywhere you look on the island. This is one of the larger hot springs, and it had a series of pools at different temperatures, some of which had these long waterfall-like structures, which were quite fun. The only problem was behind them, because of the slight sulfurous smell coming out of the water, the hot sulfurous smelling air is trapped in behind the pool. So when you're sticking your head in there or trying to get a photograph there, it's a little bit claustrophobic, but it was fascinating. And again, through the town, you start to see these little trickling hot springs. This is in the town of Furnas, or Funash, sorry, Funash, which is named for the hot springs. And there's a great park in town, like a botanical park, with a really big, although muddy looking and very smelly hot spring that people love to flock to. It's a great botanical garden with massive camellias, a really great display of unusual tropical trees and so on. It's if you're on the islands, it's definitely worth a visit just for the diversity of material that they can grow there. There's a tree fern trunk showing the vascular bundle, something you don't get to see very often. And something that I really enjoyed seeing was in the cycad garden, where they had, you can see the two red arrows pointing to these peculiar little trees. These are Wollemi pines, the tree that was discovered back in the 1990s in Australia, so-called living fossil that it was recently threatened by fires, actually, but they distributed seeds around the world to botanical gardens to try to conserve this species, which is really only found in the one little valley in the wild. Anyway, so I got to see a Wollemi pine, not quite in Australia, but at least I got to see one. We also, this is a map of the Furnas volcano, and the whole area is called the Furnas Hydropolis. It consists of the volcano, the fumaroles, hot springs, uh, rivers that run with hot water. And when you walk around the town, you see labels that tell you the name of the fumarole and how hot the water is there. And you get to see these bubbling, boiling cauldrons, steam rising. Pretty impressive to see, I must say. That was something you don't get to see around here at all. And then steam just rising from odd places around town. It's weird, like be rising from the side of the street or the middle of a brook or something like that. Like here, the wall of a cliff, just steaming away and the hot, moist steam washing around. Absolutely fascinating, the signs of volcanic activity very close to the surface. Heavily farmed landscape again, very little in the way of wild forest left. Even on the introduced species, you can see a browse line from where the cows have been chewing on them. A lot of the plants along the roads, just like here, are non-native species, including Gunnera, this massive plant from Chile. Very beautiful, very interesting, but not native. And there are a couple of different aqueducts, water carrying aqueducts that connected the towns to the water supplies up on the mountains. They've totally overgrown with plants and fascinating from a botanical point of view. Here's a lovely alga that was growing on the lower parts of this one. And lots of birds, of course, greyhound and coots and the Azores chaffinch. This is a subspecies that's native to the islands. Lots of azaleas again, and now back to some more fumaroles. And in this case, what they've done is they've got a boardwalk so you can wander around safely without falling through the crust and into the hot boiling water. In other places, they've dug holes in the ground and they put food down into the holes and they cook it. So the local restaurants actually prepare the food in these fumaroles, and you pay a little bit extra for it, but it's apparently one of the treats of the island. It's a boiled dinner,
Yeah.
a boiled dinner without lighting a fire. So here we are on the coast. We're going to poke around the coast for a few minutes, and then this is very common along the coast in the meadows. It's a parasitic plant feeding on some of the coastal species. A tree that's been Tuckamore shaped because of the onshore wind. Oxen are still used infrequently on the island. We came across quite a few of them, probably more for decoration now than for actual use. and took a couple of really interesting walks. This one went past fields that have been used as pasture land for years. So they have these cattle tracks running back and forth across the sides of the hills. Went up into the mountains, to one of the lakes up in a caldera. And there was a revegetation project going on. And they have a real problem with introduced rabbits feeding on the species they put in the ground. So they've got these plastic tubes that they use to protect all of the plantings. Giant cane is a real problem as an introduced plant. In some cases, they use it for edging fields, but in other cases, it just runs wild and gets into watersheds and river valleys and so on. Nice sort of climbing fumaria that's everywhere. Plane trees have been introduced to the island, and they're used as avenue trees as they are in much of the rest of Europe. Very, very beautiful place, trees to walk through, but not native. More cooking fumaroles in sort of the equivalent of a provincial park. This is a little park out in the country. You just take the lid off, put your food in there, warm it up, and then off you go. And on this part of the trail, they actually warn you that in some places there's natural carbon dioxide being degassed from some of the fumaroles. So you have to be very careful. If you're there too long, you may find yourself getting dizzy. We walked through the trail up to a reservoir, a small reservoir. There were rainbow trout introduced into the stream. You could see them in the water. And the building for regulating the water height was not manned, but it was interesting to explore and poke around. Like I say, a very tiny reservoir for a very small island. And you could follow the penstock down to a generating station. We wandered down through the woods, through all the introduced species that are cloaking the hillside here, to the generating station, and then down even further to the across the brook and down through the gorge, right down to the main road. Very beautiful hike, fascinating, and a really beautiful job they've done with the construction, building the metal walkway. We went into town, and on Volcano Avenue, we went to an interpretation center that took us down into a huge cave that runs under the city of Punta Delgado. It was a cave that was found apparently when a bulldozer went through the roof at one point, and then they explored it and found it's about 1 kilometer long. Again, you have this volcanic, obsidian icicle type ceiling, but here it's colored. Sometimes the colors are due to fungi and things that are growing on the surface of the rock. In other cases, it's actually minerals in the glassy material. Told you earlier about how important tiles were. Tiles are used for everything, from street signs to covering buildings to, well, you name it. You'll see tiles being used. We went to a place, a ceramic shop, and a bit of a museum. And these are some of the tiles they produce, some of the other ceramic wares. And they've been running for generations from this site. The ladies were busy painting some of the ceramics, the stuff that had already been fired, and then coloring it. And more of the hooded ladies, they were making these for people to hang on their houses. And they had this very, very spooky looking life-size one in the hallway, quite peculiar. Very interesting little factory, and definitely a traditional art on the island. Now back to the coast again for a little bit. one of the last places we stayed was in this bed and breakfast. It was a small vineyard that was converted into a series of cottages. And again, they had all sorts of plants that they were growing, from bananas to loquats and vegetables. Very, very nice hosts. And it was great fun to explore the garden and find what we could for different meals. Collared dove has been introduced to the islands. The robin is native, just like the robin you see out everywhere else in Europe. Oh, and we visited a tea farm nearby. This is the oldest tea farm surviving in Europe, maybe the only one now. And they were the guys in the middle are actually using a mechanical harvester to take the leaves off the top of the tea plants. On the left, you have an actual tea flower. On the right, you have a camellia. They're both in the same family, the Teaceae. You can see the similarity in the flowers. Another crinum, wall of crinum there. And the tea farm, just from a visual point of view, was fascinating. These rows of tightly manicured hedges going off into the distance. And we've been there long enough that they have acres and acres of these things and produce a lot of different kinds of teas. It's a peculiar little road that we took down to the coast, just a neat series of visuals. It shows how steep the coast is and how important these little fajas are, because they are the only flat land that's close to sea level. And there are very few of them. For the most part, the walls at the coast of the island is rock walls, like you see in the background. Here's a faja that has been used for a spa. There's an old small cone, volcanic cone there. There's a spa and a hotel there. They also are re-vegetating the lava here. This is native sea lavender. These are planted native species that have been put in. Lots of erosion as the basalt, which is a fairly soft rock, gets beaten apart by the waves. And what's really neat about this place is that there's a hot spring that comes to the shore and comes out under the seawater. So in on one side of this closed pool, this municipal pool, it's warm. On the other side, it's cold waves crashing in from the open Atlantic. And while we were there, it was too cold for me to go in, but there were several people who were just wandering around, wondering whether they should, and 2 or 3 who actually got into the water, but it was pretty vigorous. They have a string to hold onto so you don't get washed back out to sea. I think it was just a way of feeding the local sperm whale population, actually. But anyway, it's pretty interesting stuff. So the hot spring is in the white misty part on the lower left, and then the cold water is coming in, obviously, from the ocean. Back to the coast. This is just a lovely place called the Lookoff, the Black Rock Lookoff, because of these peculiar animal-shaped black rocks. And that's where we're going to say goodbye to Portugal and goodbye to the Azores. And thank you, everyone, for staying with me this long. And if you have any questions for us, this is a good time to ask them.
Well, wow, Michael. Wow, Anne. What a fabulous trip you had.
Oh, it was fascinating.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was
And
beautiful.
there's five more islands
That we didn't even
in
get to see.
in that archipelago. Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Did visit, so.
It
you,
almost
Michael.
Sorry?
it almost seemed prehistoric. You know, it
Oh.
had that feel to it.
It certainly has that feel, very raw, very rough, because of the really fresh rock. Some of that rock is decades old. It's not millions of years old. It's decades old. It's come, it's solidified recently. So yeah, it definitely has a very peculiar feel to it.
Does it have a particular flower? Is there a flower of this?
Sort of the flower I think that they use as a symbol for the island is that blue forget-me-not.
Okay, wow.
The hydrangea is used by the
introduced hydrangea.
That's used by the towns and by the highway department. But
yeah.
But the forget-me-not seems to be the symbol that they use on
like conservation
yeah, anything like
organizations
that.
and things
Yes,
like
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Michael,
Michael?
the picture of the hydrangeas used as divisions on the farmland.
Yes.
That's stunning. I mean, considering how they're native species, the numbers are so low. Are they making an effort to save what they have left and try to contain the invasive
They
one?
are. They are and they aren't. There's a very strong
being
conservation.
selective,
Well,
right?
there's a very strong
Yeah.
conservation movement,
Yeah.
and they have the botanical garden, and they have people who are absolutely
Yeah.
dedicated to growing these things and replanting them where they should be. On one hand, on the other hand, they have local politicians who really like the blue hydrangeas down the roadside, and they don't want anyone to tell them that they can't keep planting blue hydrangeas and ginger and so on. So it's just like here. There are the two sides to the argument, and it's really hard to get people together.
So they tend to be a bit selective, though. So, for example, on Fayal, on the island of Fayal, that caldera that we walked around. We walked on the upper rim. What they've done there is they've eradicated any of the hydrangeas
that pop up the rim.
That creep up the side. So they're trying to keep the top of the rim and down into the caldera native.
And you saw how steep that was and how large that was.
Mm.
I don't know how the volunteers do that.
And they were doing the same thing on San Miguel in the Lagoa de Fogo, which again is a caldera. This one has more of a lake in it. That was the place where they had all the trees that were being planted.
Yeah.
So again, there, because it's a natural feature that has been designated, I guess, as a native habitat, they're trying to eradicate the non-natives and reestablish more of the natives there. So it's kind of like they're kind of picking their battles. They're trying to be sort of strategic in certain areas. But I mean, so much of the island is
and you can see the seed source for all of these. The number of seeds that are being shed by these plants is phenomenal. So
beautiful images. Thank you. Sorry, Michael, to cut you off there.
Michael, this is Michael Collins.
Yes, hi there.
My wife and I visited the Azores a number of years ago, and we had a great time. We're only on the main island, so we didn't get to see many of the things you saw. But I was intrigued by the heating of your food in the sand, because that's what happened when we were there. They took boiling material on the beach, they take it out, dig a hole, put your pot in, and then at lunchtime they serve it up in a restaurant for you, which is fascinating.
Did it have a sort of a special sulfurous overtone?
It does, it's a bit of a...
No, it tasted perfectly okay. The only problem was they gave this fish, the big pot, just the two of us trying to eat it. There was no way we could get through most of it. But it was fascinating. But thank you very much indeed. It was a reminder of a very good holiday.
I'm Michael. I have a couple of questions.
Yes. Hi.
The first one is, would you just repeat the whole show now? I'd like to see it again. If you could just run through it again, but more slowly this time.
When you were there, you got which one?
Great. But the second one is, I was there probably more than 10 years ago, but except for Cerro Miguel on different islands, and my impression was on Cerro Miguel and Terceira, the invasive tree that was really out of control was the Pittosporum, sorry, the Cryptomeria. And if that's the right, that's the Japanese, what you're calling Japanese Peters, yeah. And you really just saw whole hillsides taken over by that, but nothing much else. I mean, of course, there were all the, I mean, in the way of forest trees, and partly because they had, I guess, planted them as forestry plantations, but also they were just taking over everything else. Whereas on the islands you were on, other than Cerro Miguel, my impression was, and you sort of said that maybe the Pittosporum was the dominant one. I didn't really see much in your pictures, your sort of general scenes of large areas of the Cryptomeria. Is there really, did you notice, is there a difference that some islands are sort of being taken over by one invasive and others by another? Is that happening?
I think you're right that it depends where you are and how the land is being used. Certainly the Cryptomeria was planted very heavily because of the straight, really good timber. And that was certainly very much in demand. And well, anytime there's an earthquake, anytime there's a volcanic activity, all the rebuilding requires a lot of wood, and really those would be the only nearby sources. So I think that's why they started planting them. And you're probably right that certain islands have larger patches. Certainly the cryptomeria was very much on Faial and very much contained in one area, whereas the Pittosporum was absolutely bloody everywhere. Every time you turned around, there were little ones, there were big ones. The fields were covered with them. The understory of the forest was them. The fields that the cattle were living in, as I showed you, where they were actually feeding the leaves to the cattle. Those things are absolutely everywhere there. So both of them are a bit of a plague, but they're something that the people there use, so they will never get rid of them. It's kind of like moose in Newfoundland. It's a problem in some ways, but Newfoundland
here we don't clip branches off the spruce trees to feed to the moose.
Isn't it?
Not yet, anyway. When the moose get more numerous.
Apparently, we used to plant a garden to feed.
I wonder about the island of Flores.
Yes, Flores.
Yeah, Flores and Corvo, which are the two
eastern,
westernmost. Two westernmost islands.
Actually, those are as near to St. John's as they are to Porto in Portugal.
Yeah. I think they would be very, very, interesting.
And they're supposed to be much less developed.
Yeah.
The
towns are tiny.
changed.
Yeah. Whereas like St. George or São Jorge and Faial are hugely agricultural. I mean, they like the cheeses that they make
Amazing.
there are for sale, in Lisbon and in Portugal. And I mean,
the milk, you see milk from
the Azores for sale in Portugal. So they're not only self-sufficient in terms of milk and cheese, but it's exported back to the main to the main part of the country. So much of the land has been effectively cleared, right?
Absolutely.
For cattle, yeah.
I was going to say, Michael, this is Michael again. When we flew down, you seem to have a rather circuitous route getting down there. We just flew to Toronto and went on, I think it's SATA Airlines, directly into San Miguel.
Very good.
Yeah. We could have done that, but there was only one flight a week out of Toronto.
And the weather was not very good.
Because we went in February, like late mid 20th of February. It was a bit too touchy for us. We just thought it wasn't going to work. So we wound up going to Lisbon and we spent a couple of days there. Then we went back to the Azores, we had our 3 weeks in the Azores, and then we went back to Portugal and spent another couple of weeks there. So it was more roundabout, but it was, that's just the way it was. But yeah, I mean, I'd be lovely if you could just fly directly from Toronto. Even better if you could fly from St. John's, yeah. Get your boat out of St. John's.
Those flights, in fact, that there are large Azurean communities in Toronto, Montreal, and I think Boston, is because when that volcano that you were talking about erupted, a large number of people simply left the islands, and I think both the United States and Canada lifted their immigration restrictions at that point and just let them in quickly, and so we have these significant communities in a few cities here.
Wow, I know that.
I see that Sue Meads has joined us. Sue, welcome.
Sorry for the delay. We had a phone call we had to take.
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you want to just mention the conference before? Is there anything you want us to know that you hadn't mentioned before?
Not really. They're supposed to do a poster, but I haven't heard anything about it. I sent an email to Julissa at MUN, but I haven't heard anything yet. But if they do one, then I'll send it to you, and then you can send it around to everyone.
Okay.
But as far as I know, it's still 7 to 8 o'clock on June 11th at the Whale Atrium. Still
Yeah.
haven't heard what room number it is.
Okay. We'll send a notice out closer to the date.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
actually one big lecture room off of the Whale Atrium. I don't think
Okay,
anybody would
so
have
that's
any trouble, and it's a beautiful room. So
good.
it's quite comfortable. Yeah,
Good.
and big. Yeah, should be great. Look forward to that. That's less than 1 month away.
Yeah.
Isn't
I
that hard to
know.
believe? June 11th. Anyway, yeah. Well, Michael and Ann, you've given us quite an evening tonight. So much to think of. And like Roger, I think we'll all be looking at it again on the video. So
Definitely.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming, and do take care.
Thank you. Yeah,
Bye.
we have a little
Okay.
gift
Bye.
coming your way, Michael. Nan, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thanks
Thank you,
everybody for
Karen.
coming. Yeah, welcome, Carm. Okay.